You should be dead. And you, and you, and especially you. Sometimes I feel like One Piece is that scene from The Simpsons where Homer meets his mother at his grave, and the groundsman is just like, gosh dang it, isn't anyone in this cemetery actually dead? And then Pound opens his coffin and says, well, look, I didn't want to be a bother, but it would be mighty nice to go to Dressrosa to see my daughters and their psychotic mafia husbands. Death rarely has any consequence in One Piece, but we are going to fix that. We're going to put on our straw hats and channel our inner Thriller Bark Luffys to shove these zombies back into the ground where they belong. And I want to be clear about what we're doing here. We are specifically naming, shaming, and ultimately burying characters who were given blatant death scenes. We're not going after characters who defy logic, like say Spandam that one time when Robin snapped him like a Kit Kat on Enisobi, because as owl as that is, it was never narratively intended to showcase a death. My thesis is that Eiichiro Oda is a cheat, a filthy story cheat. Someone double dipping into our communal pirate guacamole, wanting to provide impact and character growth through dramatic death scenes, but without the cost of the actual death. Eiichiro Oda is trying and honestly succeeding in cheating the system, but we are not gonna let him get away with it, are we? Starting with Igaram, who, when cosplaying Princess Vivi, offered himself as a decoy on Whiskey Peak, and then went on to have his ship promptly exploded. So we're talking One Piece BP here before Pell, which means that being caught in explosions generally led to death, or at the very least, the impression of death. But in chapter 180, Igaram returns as ink on page with no evidence of injury, with the exception of this single band-aid. That's all the damage that explosion did. And in retrospect, I guess it served as an appetizer for what was to come, because the explosion Igaram got caught in was significantly larger than the entire island of Whiskey Peak itself. No explanation was ever given for his survival, but a common fan theory is that Nico Robin, in an event best described as somehow, both blew up Igaram's ship and saved his life. But I actually have an alternate explanation. Also, this video is sponsored by Dislight, the game that combines the holy trinity of art design, gacha, and strategy for an unbelievably immersive gameplay experience. Although Dislight isn't just a game, it's an ongoing series of urban myth comics. Set far into the rather stylized future, Dislight tells the tale of espers, chosen individuals who possess the powers of literal gods, with some seeking to use these abilities for justice and others for chaos. Which will you choose? And you can jump into the story wherever you want. And the comics in particular are beautifully drawn with a distinctive cell animation style. And when it comes to characters, there are infinite possibilities in Dislight, as opposed to say the same 4 or 5 different waifu templates that you tend to find elsewhere. And furthermore, every character tells a unique tale, such as in Dislight Summer Update, which recounts the story of Jiaotu's fate of being ensnared in an eternal cycle of summer. Plus, you can participate in various summer events to earn massive rewards. You can directly support my channel by downloading Dislight from the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen. And using my code will earn you great rewards to fight the gods and fight for infinite possibilities. So do that thing, but for now it's back to you, me. But I actually have an alternate explanation. At this point in the manga, it should be noted that Eiichiro Oda had only just decided to make Miss Wednesday Princess Vivi. That was a very last minute bit of narrative improv, and my hypothesis is that at this stage, Oda had not yet planned on making Robin a Straw Hat, because she is the only crew member who wasn't planned from the very beginning. I think that down the line, Oda realized that, hey, I want Robin on the crew, but then thought to himself, wait, didn't she like murder that guy? Oh, that's not very nice. You know what? Doesn't matter. He's alive, and Robin was good all along. Problem solved. Oh, Eiichiro Oda, you've done it again. Because Igaram really serves no other purpose being alive. I mean, he got to Alabasta and then did nothing. He did nothing. We didn't even see him again until after Crocodile was beaten. So I do think him being alive may be very much to keep Robin's hands clean, and she has a lot of hands to keep clean. But regardless, we are still going to plonk Igaram exactly where he belongs and move swiftly to his more egregious Alabastan counterpart Pell. So I don't think I need to go over the actual events of this one, because Pell is very much the thing that all One Piece fans recognize and tend to agree on. But he quite thoroughly Igarammed himself by being at the center of a city-destroying explosion. And to be fair to Pell, he needed more than a single band-aid to recover afterwards, but not much more. He had to visit his local GP, who was literally in the middle of nowhere in the desert, and after a few days, he was up and running, or up and flying, or whatever it is that he does. He was up and not dying, that's what he does. And we did actually see the damage caused later when Pell visited Gadatsu's hot springs, which was some pretty serious scars. However, I was more shocked that he still had a body to house those scars. So I know that at least one of you in the comments has probably already written this, because for some reason people don't like watching the whole video before deciding to offer their insight, but you may or may not have heard of the Pell 9/11 9/11 conspiracy theory. There is a belief online that Pell was originally supposed to die, but then 9/11 happened, and Shueisha thought that, oh, that might be a bit insensitive to have a character die in an explosion that was targeting a building. It was targeting many buildings, actually. It was targeting a whole city. But there has never been any evidence to suggest this. And in fact, this whole issue is very much conflated with something else. Because at the time, Eiichiro Oda did actually make a 9/11 statement. He was the only author in Weekly Shonen Jump to do so, and he even made a color spread in response, which is what he often does in times of tragedy. But the chapter where Pell sacrifices himself was published on November 19th, 2001. So over 2 months after the event and 6 weeks after Oda made his statement. If there was a problem with Pell, then it would have been flagged long before then. Or at the very least, they wouldn't have waited until February the next year to reveal his survival. But as for the actual reason why Pell survived, the answer is, I guess Oda was just feeling generous that day. But we are not. So Pell, we are putting you right back where you belong. And then moving onwards to a thing a lot of people forget about, but our next death scene was actually Bellamy. And this happened after Skypiea. There was this very brief section where we returned to Giant, check in on good old Bellamy, and what we saw was a Flamingoman forcing Sarkis to fight Bellamy. And the last thing we saw of One Punched Man was a terrified expression as Sarkis was about to slash him from behind. After that, we cut to a scream, a general ah, and then a townsman saying, Bellamy, I can't believe he's ellipsis, with the next implied word being dead. Bellamy, I can't believe he's dead. However, there is a however to this situation, because prior to this, Doflamingo did say, go on, do whatever you like, but I don't need you in my crew. So it can be read as Doflamingo letting him live, albeit in a very brutal way. So as much as it was absolutely structured as a death scene, we're gonna give Bellamy a rare pass. In fact, what he can do is attend the funeral of all of the other characters we're burying today, one of which is Pagaya. A very interesting case because he's one that even Oda himself admits is absolutely ridiculous. Alive or not, I actually think that Pagaya has one of the best death scenes in all of One Piece. As one of Enel's minions reveals important informations, knowing that they will be struck down imminently, Pagaya instinctively pushes his daughter Konos off the island, ensuring not only her survival, but the survival of all Skypieans by conveying Enel's plans. It really is a great parental moment, almost as if Pagaya was programmed with this failsafe mechanism to save Konos. And as a sacrificial death scene, it hits all of the right beats. But then in chapter 300, Pagaya very sneakily joins the group as they are all lamenting his death, at which point they turn and yell at him in a genuinely hilarious moment. Because at this point, Eiichiro Oda knows what he's doing is ridiculous. He's done it too many times, so even he is making a meta joke about his own writing. Doesn't bother explaining how Pagaya survived, just plays it off for laughs, and at the very least, I do appreciate the self-awareness. However, we all know that Pagaya belongs in the very ground that his people worship. And next up may be a bit of a controversial one, but it's Bon Clay, and he also has one of the greatest death scenes in the series without actually following through on said death. At the outset, Bon Clay is very different because he's not just some auxiliary character. While I think most of the readers and watchers are a bit indifferent to Igram and Pagaya, that is definitely not the case with Bon Clay. The flower of friendship can bloom even in hell. Now the petals of that flower will be scattered upon the rolling bosom of the sea. One day I will make that flower bloom again. Oh, come away. Those are the final thoughts of our treasured friend, Bon Clay. And Magellan even asked Bon Clay if he has any last words to say out loud, which is probably the most cliche possible thing you could say to indicate an impending death. Unless Magellan is actually saying, any last words before the connection on this Denden Mushi cuts, because your friend has successfully sailed away, and you know what? To celebrate, here's a cake. Congratulations on being the first group to mass break out of Impel Down. We'll prepare level 5.5 to your comfort, and you shall remain our honored guest. I'm gonna go ahead and assume that Magellan probably didn't say that. In fact, what he probably did was viciously murder Bon Clay with all of his poisons. But then again in chapter 666, Bon Clay is shown alive and well, having somehow escaped. The only plausible theory I can think of is that in that moment, Blackbeard or Shiryu or another crew member appeared and struck down Magellan before he could kill Bon Clay. But even if so, this was very cheeky of Mr. Oda-san, and as much as I will be celebrating when Bon Clay does return to the actual story, he was given a genuine death scene, and now he's being given a genuine grave. And now we have probably the most unique death-based situation in all of One Piece, which belongs to Sabo. And this is very special because Sabo was given a death scene in a flashback. And being a One Piece character in a flashback is like operating the holodeck with the safety off. Your chances of death flip from 0% to nigh on guaranteed. And this is Oda at his absolute greediest. He wanted to give Luffy and Ace the traumatic development of Sabo's death, but at the same time, he wanted to pop Sabo in some Tupperware for later with the extra extra sneaky element of having Sabo declared officially dead in Databook Green. The funny thing is, even back then, almost nobody believed it. And it's really fun to look back on comments from literally a decade ago. He isn't dead. Monkey D. Dragon saved him. Of course not. He's going to be the Naruto spoiler of One Piece. Because by this time, Oda was the author who cried death so often that we all just stopped believing him. And this led to some pretty wild ideas about how Sabo was going to be inevitably reintroduced. Well, some of the comments say that Trafalgar Law is actually Sabo. Who knows, but that seems like an interesting idea. So that is what led to the rather short-lived Lawbo theory. But some people did actually believe he was dead. Not many at all, but some. Why are people downvoting anyone who says he's dead? He died. Confirmed in a data book. Sure, it's nice to think he lived, but to no avail. Try as you might, it's all in vain. Raditz. That comment sure aged well, as did Sabo, but not in this video because he was a child when his death scene occurred. Then there's Charlotte Moscato, the Minister of Gelato, who is often thought of as dead because someone did literally state that he'd been killed in the very chapter that he was introduced. Not only that, but in the very next chapter, he was confirmed dead again with the following line. Sir Moscato, he's dead. So it's pretty understandable if after that you then saw Moscato alive in chapter 901 and were a bit confused as to this whole death thing. In retrospect, there's a single panel when Montdor is ordering Big Mom's Soul Harbinger to restore Moscato's life, but it's not particularly clear what's happening in the manga at the time, especially as this moment is surrounded on all sides by death confirmations. Like, they drag Moscato's corpse away and everything. But you know what we actually have here is a bit of a Brook situation. Moscato did actually die, but he then came back to life. So he's one of the very few characters to actually follow through on his death scene. And you know what? Instead of giving him a grave, he's going to get his own religion and will preside over the funeral. Another member of which will be Pound, who in one of the most touching moments of Whole Cake Island sacrifices himself for the daughter who will never know him. But it was all worth it just to see Chiffon once. Oda is so good at writing moments like these. In fact, the only thing he's better at is retrospectively undermining these moments. Thinking about it, this death scene is actually very similar to Bellamy's. Both characters looking forward moments before a blade-wielding maniac stabs them in the back. With Pound, you even get the slice sound effect in the next panel, and you see blood dropping from the sword in the panel after that. The message is very clear. Pound is dead. But he's not, because in chapter 979, he washes up on Dressrosa, then reunites with his daughters and lives assumedly happily ever after. Which is nice, that's nice, but we're not here to be nice. Pound, I'm afraid that for all intents and purposes, you died, and now you must honor your sacrifice by actually being sacrificed. But now we have probably what is the most insane case of all, and almost no one ever talks about this. But this character hasn't just had one death scene. No, this character has had a grand total of 3 death scenes. And that character is Pacoms, our lion, mink, turtle, fruit-using man, who was given one death scene on Zou by being shot in the back by Capone Gang Beige. He survived, allegedly because he activated his turtle powers in time to stop the death, and then he made this very bold declaration. When I recover, I'll go back. That beige brat thinks he's killed me, but it ain't over yet between us. And to his credit, Pacoms was right. This wasn't over, because Beige would go on to kill Pacoms again by shooting him this time in the front where the shell isn't, but also shooting him off a cliff and into a sea of ravenous, hungry sharks. And this is where I am convinced that Oda is just screwing with us, because this is 3 causes of death all wrapped into one. And Pacoms still doesn't die because he gets rescued by the Sun Pirates. But that's okay, because we're not done with him yet. After rescuing Luffy from the Mirror World, Pacoms uses his Sulong form, and whilst this is kept vague in the manga, the anime makes it very clear that the Big Mom Pirates subdued and executed him by repeatedly impaling Pacoms with spears. He even gets his own Whitebeard-style death scene where you see his body still standing with all of the spears stuck into him. He ends up looking more like a cactus than either a lion or a turtle. But at this point, he survived being shot in the back, being shot in the front, falling from a cliff, and swimming with hungry sharks as a devil fruit user. So what are spears gonna do to him? Nothing. But what are we gonna do to him? Something. And Pacoms is going to be given 5 separate graves, one for each death that he should have incurred. And for now, that will complete our hypothetical One Piece cemetery.